Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today we're diving into a story that feels like it belongs in a movie, but it's all real. It's about one man, his lifelong obsession with New York's transit system, and a cycle of crime, punishment, and fascination that has made him both infamous and strangely sympathetic. His name is Darius McCollum.
That's right, Fred. For those who don't know, McCollum has been called the transit imposter, the train man, and even a folk hero. Born in 1965, he developed a deep fascination with trains as a child. By the age of 8, he had memorized the entire New York City subway map. He wasn't just a fan, he was consumed by the system.
And that obsession took a very unusual turn. At just 15 years old, McCollum pulled off his first major stunt. He actually drove an E-train full of passengers for 6 stops, perfectly following all the procedures of a real motorman. Writers later said he was polite, professional, and seemed completely legitimate. That was his first arrest.
And unfortunately, it was far from the last. Over the years, McCollum has been arrested more than 30 times for transit-related crimes. He has impersonated subway motormen, bus drivers, even Long Island Railroad employees. At one point in the 1990s, the MTA plastered his photo across the subway system, basically warning riders, if you see this man in uniform, he does not work for us.
One of the most striking things is that McCollum wasn't joyriding recklessly. In many cases, he actually did the job correctly. In 2000, for example, he signed out a train, performed maintenance runs, extinguished track fires, then signed the train back in, all by the book. It was as if he wanted to prove he belonged.
Exactly. And this is where it gets complicated. Experts say McCollum is autistic with Asperger's syndrome. His fixation with trains is intense and lifelong. A prison psychiatrist once described him as deeply knowledgeable, highly intelligent, but trapped in a cycle of compulsion. Autism advocates have even compared him to Frank Abagnale, the famous con man who later worked with the FBI, arguing that the MTA should have found him a legitimate role instead of repeatedly throwing him in prison.
But the MTA refused, citing liability concerns. And so the cycle continued. In 2010, he stole a private bus in New Jersey, drove it around JFK Airport in Queens, picking up real passengers along the way. Witnesses described him as helpful and courteous, answering questions like a seasoned driver. When police arrested him, they admitted he was a gentleman, calm and cooperative.
In fact, police officers have often said McCollum isn't violent or malicious. He doesn't damage property, he doesn't hurt people, he just can't resist the lure of trains and buses. But the law is the law, and he's spent nearly 20 years of his life behind bars for these repeated crimes.
And the story gets even darker. In 2015, he was arrested again for stealing a Greyhound bus from Port Authority. And after that, a judge ruled him dangerously mentally ill. He was committed to a psychiatric facility indefinitely. It's a tragic ending for a man whose only real crime was being unable to control his obsession.
It raises big questions about how society deals with people like McCollum. Was prison really the right place for him? Couldn't his knowledge and passion have been redirected into something positive? Advocates argue that if he'd been hired as a consultant or given supervised work, the cycle of crime and punishment might have been avoided.
And that's why McCollum has become a kind of cult figure. For many, especially in the autism community, he's a symbol of both passion and tragedy. A man punished not for greed or violence, but for being unable to live without the trains he loved. His story even inspired a documentary, Off the Rails, which critics praised for exploring the fine line between obsession and illness.
At the end of the day, Darius McCollum's story is about more than stolen buses and trains. It's about how we handle people whose fixations fall outside the norm, and whether we punish them, support them, or try to understand them.
Well said, Adam. Folks, what do you think? Should McCollum have been given a chance within the transit system, or was prison the only option? It's a debate that touches law, psychology, and humanity itself.
And with that, we'll wrap up today's episode. Thanks for joining us for this fascinating journey into the life of the so-called transit imposter. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and maybe appreciate the subway system just a little more.